Good evening, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to Cambodia Global Dialogue of Southeast Asia TV. Tonight we have the pleasure to have a personality who I would say he's Cambodian as far as I'm concerned, Matthew Rendall. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, Matthew is a long-time friend of mine. We knew each other way back in 1994, 95, around that time, when we are working together as a lawyer. I was with UNDP, Matthew was with the Asia Foundation.
Correct.
And from there, we start our legal career in Cambodia, but different path. And tonight, I'm happy that he agreed to come to the show to discuss with us a theme that is quite dear to the development of this country, which is foreign direct investment, Cambodia and foreign direct investment. But before we get to that, maybe I would want to give the floor to you, Matt, to say a bit about your background, so this way the audience know where you're coming from. I know you're married to a Cambodian woman.
Correct, a well-known Cambodian woman apparently, who runs a modeling agency. But my background is I was a commercial lawyer in Australia for 4 or 5 years, primarily working for insurance companies. We did, in addition to that, property law and migration law. And it's actually the migration law that brought me to Cambodia. So back in, I think it was 92, 93, we worked on migration issues for Cambodians. 94, we came to this country as part of that process on the migration issues, working with the Australian Embassy, and pretty much stayed on. Went into legal development work, as you know, worked a fair bit with you in the early days. And for about 8 years or so with USAID funded programs, drafting laws, teaching at law schools, law programs, this sort of thing. And in about 2002, switched across to go back into commercial law with what is now Shironi and Associates, primarily focusing on assisting foreign investors with their investments into Cambodia. And that's what we're doing to this day.
So it's almost 17 years of Cambodian experience,
correct.
per se, in the legal work.
Yeah.
And I would say that for the last, almost 2 decades since Cambodia had peace, we see a wave of investment in foreign direct investment, different wave, right? In the early day, it was quite different. It was more into natural resource, and it was in tourism development, it was in construction. Then the second wave came, the garment industry, and then the crisis, the crisis. But I think the global economic crisis have sort of a little bit in the background now. We see a reemergence of interest of foreign direct investment into Cambodia, particularly this year. As managing director of this premier law firm, Shironi Associates, you probably have to deal a lot with foreign direct investment. But first, do you perceive a sort of, like investment interest back to the country? I mean, as compared to the pre-economic crisis?
Absolutely. I mean, what we've noticed probably in the last year to 18 months is a resurgence of interest in Cambodia. And not just that, there was always people coming and looking.
Yes.
And even during the economic crisis, we had people coming and looking. But what we've seen is actual people coming in and putting money down and making commitments for investment. That's increased markedly probably the last 18 months and continues to grow. I mean, there's some, as was reported in last week's papers, there's been a big property investment in Cambodia by globally one of the premier property development companies, Hong Kong Land. And that alone, I think, is a good sign, because that shows to other investors, Cambodia is a good place to do business.
Yes.
Cambodia is an unknown quantity outside of Cambodia. So when you get somebody of the likes of Hong Kong Land, who are the parent company is Jardines Matheson, you get a blue chip investor of that caliber coming in, the people who developed a large part of Singapore and Hong Kong. That sends a good signal to the rest of the world that Cambodia is a good place to do business. And we've noticed probably in the last 18 months, particularly the last 6 months, the 12 months to 6 months, a real resurgence of interest in Cambodia. Areas in, property development, again, that came to a standstill. That seems to be starting off again. Agricultural development, which in itself is a tremendous thing. I mean, that's one area I think everybody agrees Cambodia needs developing.
Yes.
Traditionally, historically, it's been Cambodia's area, and foreign investors now coming into. We've noticed in the last year or so into agriculture, be it food or wood plantations, biofuels, this sort of thing, but agriculture. Yeah.
Oh, Matthew, basically, it's clear that Cambodia, as emerging from so many years of devastation, resource is clearly deficient. I mean, here I'm not just talking about human resource; I'm talking about financial resource, and that's why the critical role of foreign sort of like injection of fund into the country, the saving, the money, the investment capital. But I think there was a book written by Hernando de Soto. He said that capital is very shy, in the sense that capital like to go to a place where it's certain.
Correct.
Capital is like a fish. It will swim to a cool pond.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in this sense, perhaps you could share a bit your experience from the perspective of a foreign investor. What would motivate them to come to a country? Because look, Cambodia is part of ASEAN, but let's face it, Cambodia is competing with our own neighbor, because let's face it, we need to attract foreign direct investment to our country, and so is Vietnam, and so is Laos, and so is Thai. So what motivates them when they decide to come to a country?
I think different things, different factors motivate different investors, and for Cambodia, I think one of the things is just that. You've got Thailand and Vietnam have a lot of investors in that area. Cambodia has few, so that in itself is appealing. It's an area where there's little competition.
Yeah.
There is vast swags of resource available in terms of land and people and this, that, and the other, which is underutilized. You'll find now that the marketplace is crowded in Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, etc. So Cambodia is appealing because there hasn't been that much investment to date in those areas, particularly in agriculture and property development. So that alone, Cambodia is also appealing because you'll find that one of the advantages Cambodia has is a lack of red tape, in a sense. It's not over-regulated yet, which is a good thing. So it's an easy place, actually, to come in and set up business. The time it takes to establish companies, the amount of, not so much regulation, but the amount of work it takes to establish companies is far less in a place like Cambodia than it is. So it's actually quite an easy place to do business. And we do have good resources in that sense, and we do have both human resources and natural resources that are available. In the past, it's been difficult because of access. I mean, literally just accessing some of these areas in Cambodia was difficult infrastructure-wise.
Yeah.
So you just couldn't access some of these areas that may be good for plantations. Now, of course, the whole country's accessible. And that's changed a lot in the last 10 years. And that's one of the reasons why investors are now looking at ag, whereas they probably weren't 10 years ago. I mean, just the logistics of getting to place, it was too expensive to get there. So Cambodia is now, given its development over the last 10 years, both infrastructure-wise, politically, it's actually a lot easier place to do business there. And I think word is getting out in that sense. So now we're seeing people come in and realizing that logistically it's an easy place to do business. They then have to get used to the way business is done here. Because of course every country is different. And whereas they may be familiar with the issues in Vietnam, familiar with the issues in Indonesia, Thailand, etc., they now have to learn what it's like to do business in Cambodia. Commercially, it matches up, it stacks up, it's fine. The land here is on a commercial level, the resources on a commercially viable. It's not an expensive place to do business in that regard. So they just have to get used to how things operate in Cambodia, and that's what they're doing now.
You mentioned how things operate in Cambodia. You have to understand that Cambodia is coming from it's sort of like a past-dependent historical context that sort of shaped how the thinking of Cambodian entrepreneur think. And for me, I think there is some clear paradigm shift that need to take place in the mind of Cambodian entrepreneur versus Cambodian corporate, manager. Right? I see this have not taken place yet.
Right.
The shifting from a mom and pop, a small businessman running on family saving, and then certainly with the right business growth during the big boom day, they certainly have millions of dollars. 200 staff, but still acting as the father-in-law, still
Correct.
acting as the brother-in-law, and the corporate mindset have not set in yet. And you see, you and I are practicing lawyer. The first thing when a foreign direct investor come and require our legal service is say, I about to acquire or joint venture or partner with a local company. I want to do diligence. And for the Cambodian, every time I mention due diligence, they went berserk. They say, oh my God, we're going to be investigated. They're going to want to find out everything. I think we need to demystify that. And probably you're in good position to demystify a little bit. What is due diligence? Why it's so important? And why the Cambodian entrepreneur need to accept that due diligence as a way to do business?
Yeah, that's a very good issue. And I mean, this is certainly, as lawyers, and we're advising foreign investors, they're going to go into a joint venture with an already existing Cambodian venture. Due diligence, of course, is the first thing. And we have noticed that from the Cambodian side, they do seem to get a little bit nervous about what due diligence means. And it's not an investigation. We're not talking about police coming down and investigating and looking to dig up dirt. Due diligence it merely is explaining to and providing the details about the business to the foreign investor. But you have to bear in mind that foreign investors usually come from developed systems. And everything is in writing.
Yes.
They cannot rely on oral promises. They cannot rely on practices as such. They have to answer to their shareholders and in turn higher up. So how it's developed in these countries is that everything has to be in writing.
Yes.
So all promises have to be in writing, all commitments have to be in writing, whatever the business does. So if it has licenses, if the local person is saying, look, we can do A, B, and C, the foreign investor needs that in writing. So when they do due diligence, they're merely asking to check to ensure that all registrations, primarily licenses, are valid, in order, and up to date. That's pretty much what they're looking for.
Yes.
And they're coming at it from a perspective of their own culture,
Yeah.
where if they go to run a business, they come from heavily regulated societies.
Yes.
And everything requires a license. Every promise from a partner has to be committed to a contract in writing, so they're used to that. So if they see oral promises,
Yes.
they in their own way cannot trust them.
Yes.
They need that put in writing to be able to convince their shareholders who are committing this money
Yes.
that it's okay to go forward, that what we're being told you can do because there's a written document somewhere from the relevant authority confirming that. And due diligence is merely that. It's not looking for, it's not an investigation in the sense they're looking for anything untoward or dirt to dig up or this, that and the other. They're only concerned with the business operations and whatever we do, is it valid?
I teach a special class for a member of the Chamber of Commerce. A lot of Oknya are in my class, and I teach corporate law. And it's interesting how people view the due diligence, and pretty much in the beginning a little bit very averse, But after we spend a couple of weeks on the issue, it turned out that they now look at due diligence as also a way to self-assess themselves.
Correct.
They're
a great point.
sort of like a financial viability. Hey, they now know that they are short of this.
Yep.
They know now that they should improve in that. It's sort of like prepping them. And to me, for if they're open-minded, in this case they are, right? Because they are mostly medium-sized enterprise. For them, they say they've been doing business, but they were never been asked to do all that thing. I have to say that for many Cambodian companies, after they incorporate with the Ministry of Commerce, they have their memorandum article association, sign, seal, and guess what? Where's it going? Straight to the coffer, right? Lock. And here go for next 3 years is like a gold certificate, they don't touch. But they don't realize, oh my God, it's a lot of other requirements that the law required. But to be fair to them, they didn't know that. Now they realize, wait a minute, I need to do the right thing, which is required by law, which when the time comes, the foreign investor will be looking exactly for that document, that board resolution.
Correct.
When you buy that land that you are now trying to sell to the foreign investor, did you have the authority to buy? And to me, this is what I see, this due diligence is now helping them to understand where they're coming from. But I want to move to something a little bit more forward-looking. when you are talking about investment, you're talking about some sort of arrangement, either with a local company as a partner, or either as a supplier, as a joint venture, arrangement, something like this. At one point, there'll be some concern about, the dispute, because, it's like a couple. There will all be some squabble a little bit here and there. But how do you solve that, right? Cambodia do not have a commercial court yet. So investor come, they'll be looking, when we have a dispute, what are we going to do? Commercial arbitration. What's your view on that?
Foreign investors at the moment, that's one of the first things they ask, of course. I mean, and again, coming from heavily regulated societies, they're used to the fact that any slight word in the contract, if there's a misunderstanding about the meaning of it, parties are willing
Yes.
to seek a third party to intervene and to judge that. And that, as a result of the lack of sort of a sophisticated or developed dispute resolution system in Cambodia, because it's still early days, here, are developing those whole institutions. They do two things. One is, of course, they will usually call for that arbitrator to be in somewhere where they do have a developed institution, Singapore, for example, or whatever. But what they're actually trying to do first is they will try and get as much certainty as they can in the business arrangement they're about to enter into. So they will try to reduce to writing and get written commitments on every possible aspect going forward they think could be uncertain.
Yes.
And they're trying to get that certainty now before they sign up. And because they come from systems where oral promises basically are not enforceable in that sense, it's whatever's written is what is to be relied upon, they come with that mentality. So if they're being promised, we can build a building of, 50 stories, whatever, they need that in writing.
Yes.
If they're being promised that, look, you will be provided licenses to clear the land, to sell it, they need that in writing, now.
Yes.
And so certainty, the one thing I've found here, that issue of certainty is the one thing that probably has been the greatest stumbling block for most investors' decisions whether to commit or not. And it's something that almost without exception, every foreign investor looks for. It's something almost that investment every joint venture partner has a problem with, because they're used to a system. Like you said before, it's the father running the household, running the family business, or whatever he says. If he's promising, it will happen. They're used to a system like that in Cambodia primarily, where practice actually is a very significant thing. And so they can say, look, it'll be fine. We know, we've been told by so-and-so, the relevant authority or minister, we can do this. And they know, in fact, that will carry weight going down the track. A foreign investor has been brought up to require everything to be put in writing. So if you've got that promise from the relevant authority, well, the foreign investor is going to want that in writing. Hasn't been necessary in Cambodia, the way they've done business to date. But as they attract foreign investors, there's going to have to be a change in mindset. And the foreign investor is, again, not being difficult. They're not, there's nothing suspicious about what they're trying to do here when they ask you to, because there's no hidden agenda. It's merely saying, look, we agree that it's doable, can you just put that in writing? Because we need to prove it to our board. And then that's what it is.
Speaking, for me, I can't help but to look much in the larger context more has been, from the perspective of a country as a whole, of legal framework. Because my background is always mixed with the development policy, and I always looked at, the right legal framework will help the private sector, to perform, because economic actor need a certain framework. And to me, I looked at, from a commercial perspective, from a practicing attorney, if you would, look back and advise the government, whether commerce, CDC, land management, agriculture, whatever, what would you think would require additional change? Say, for example, is our corporate law adequate? Is our investment law adequate? Is our land law adequate? What would you think that could improve? If it's already great, then we don't need further change. But all I can say, for example, that in the commercial framework, we are about to have, hopefully this year, a commercial contract law, right? So this is a good piece. But up to now, from the corporate perspective, you think it's adequate?
The example of the commercial contract law is a good example, because we're talking about, we do have a contract law, as you know.
Yes.
Decree 38 from 19 88.
Which I'm sorry to say that according to that old decree, if I want to buy a banana flambe at in Khmer we call it chichin, right? You know, which is a deep fried banana, you know, which costs $2 or 8,000 real. I have to have a writing, right?
That's very
so
true.
I don't think we need that.
But what, you know, so we have this contract law from way back when, and the point being is it's very basic.
Yeah.
So it's and whereas it's not overly restrictive. Most of the principles in that are pretty familiar.
Yeah.
To foreign investors. It's the offer acceptance,
Yes.
it's the consideration. They understand the base. The trouble is it doesn't go any deeper than that. So what happens when you get certain issues in a contract and there's no law governing what the rule is on that? This has pretty much been the problem that Cambodia's had to date. It has the major laws. On the whole, they're fairly unrestricted, they're fairly open, they're fairly easy to deal with. But what they lack is the number of sub-rules and regulations you need to deal with all those possible
scenarios.
And this is exactly what the commercial contract law will do. I mean, it'll go into far greater detail as to what each of those major principles mean in practice. And again, this is something that we often get from our investor clients, saying, look, we know that the government does A, B, and C. Can you just get us the law that says that? That says that is...
Or the regulation that say that.
Correctly, or more so the regulation.
Yes.
But can you actually, and that's what they lack. We can't actually go and read through a sub-decree or a percuss actually deals with that specific occurrence.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of missing, and these are executive regulations, we're not talking laws of the National Assembly, so they're executive. But there still are a lot of this. It gets back to the certainty, it gets back to things have to be in writing. And we come from a culture where those two things are given with every business deal.
I have to wrap up by throwing a challenge to Cambodia as a whole that time is moving fast, and in 4 years' time, 2015, Cambodia, you know, whether we like it or not, or we should like it, that we be a member of the ASEAN Economic Community. We be part of the larger ASEAN sort of like bloc, where free movement of labor, free movement of investment, that sort of thing, transport, trade, and everything. And I think it's important that we start changing our paradigm, our way of doing business. And here, the private sector, our private sector, which now most of them, I would say even 98% of them are still thinking as an entrepreneur. Nothing wrong with being an entrepreneur, but I want them to start thinking a bit moving forward to become a corporate Cambodia with a corporate mindset, a corporate best practice. That's the only way we're going to benefit from this larger economic integration.
Correct.
Your last word before I close the program. What would you want, what would be your last word on this one?
I would say that, again, we get back to this idea that whatever, and it gets back to corporate good governance, corporate good practice, is that when you're running operations, when you're running businesses, you need to have your house in order in terms of all the necessary rules and regulations are being complied with, applied within your business, and that you've got that set of documents that proves that. So if there's a necessity to register your business with the Ministry of Labour, the law says that, go ahead and do that, get that done, check all those boxes, and have that in place all the time and up to date. That's going to make it a lot easier for foreign investors to buy into existing enterprises here. Without that, it takes an awful long time for them to be satisfied they're making a safe investment, because all that stuff has to be done. So the idea is, as you do a business, check all the boxes, get everything in order, and just go ahead and do that. So
I can wrap up by saying that your main message about dealing with foreign direct investment is all about certainty.
Correct,
quote
absolutely.
Unquote, certainty.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks, Matt. I mean, it's a pleasure, and 30 minutes, like I say, it's going so fast. But I hope to have the opportunity to invite you again in future to discuss something, something else. Still relate to law, still relate to commercial practice. But it's a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you. It's my pleasure.
All right.
Enjoyable.
Well, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the end of the program, and I hope you learned something from that, and particularly the private sector, particularly the entrepreneur. I hope you understand a bit more, what motivates your future potential partner or potential investor that may want to do business with you. So get your book in order, get your paperwork, your document, get it in writing, get it to fulfill the Cambodian law compliance, and then you're ready to be a partner with them. So Once again, thank you for watching our show, and I see you all next week again for another thematic of the Cambodia Global Dialogue. Good night.